Hi everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. This is Composition Episode 6, Framing, Negative Space, Room to Breathe, and Amputations. The previous episode discussed framing by avoiding placing your subject in the center of the frame and showing examples of the rule of thirds. Now there are other factors to consider when we are framing our subject and composing our image. In this episode we will discuss framing and using negative space, room to breathe, and avoiding amputations. Sometimes we use negative space to emphasize size and dimension. Here I was snorkeling on the surface and took this simple shot of my daughter free swimming in the Caymans. The negative space emphasizes depth and context. Here I didn't want to get right up to the ascending diver on the wreck, the Spiegel Grove. In my opinion, this image works because it shows depth and dimension by the use of the negative space of the Spiegel Grove wreck, which was about 50 feet beneath the diver who was ascending on the line. By seeing how small the divers actually on the wreck appear compared to the ascending diver, we can appreciate depth and scale. My wife actually took this image of me freediving to about 30 feet or 40 feet depth in an attempt to photograph some eagle rays. In my opinion, the use of negative space here provides a sense of dimension and scale. Here's another example of the use of negative space to convey context in this image of two of my dive buddies diving in carousel on a shore dive. This is a really simple wide-angle shot of a crab at the Blue Heron Bridge. Rather than filling the frame with the subject of the crab, I used lots of negative space to show the surrounding sandy seascape and water background. Again, to show some context, the environment that the crab was in. Similar idea here with this octopus in the left lower corner taken on a shore dive in the Caymans. Here's an image of my dive buddy on a reef on a shore dive in the Caymans in the upper left third of the image. The small size of the diver and the large amount of negative space, being the water and the reef, provides a nice amount of negative space and provides good context, in my opinion. Another important aspect of use of negative space in framing is to allow room for your subject to breathe or move into. Now, this image fails because this beautiful turtle, I've left it no room to swim. It will soon exit the frame, and it makes it kind of disturbing in some way or off balance to look at. Whereas I think this image is much more appealing. The turtle now has room to swim and move into. Similar ideas with this fish immediately exiting out of the frame, whereas this barracuda has plenty of room to move into. Much better picture in my opinion. This image is really disjointed overall. Not only is the fish immediately swimming out of the frame, but unfortunately I decided to depress the shutter and caught my dive buddy when he was clearly not looking at the subject. Very bad timing on my part. And this image is even worse. What was I thinking? Well, I was trying to get my wife in the same frame with this beautiful tarpon. Unfortunately, not only is the tarpon on the verge of swimming out of the frame, but my wife is below the tarpon and can't even really see the tarpon. Lousy composition, bad timing, too bad. This is somewhat better. My wife is now looking at the tarpon, and both my wife and the tarpon have a little bit of room to breathe and swim into. So don't forget to give attention to your subjects. Give them breathing room and room to swim. One final aspect of the use of negative space is to avoid unpleasant amputations. It is nice when the subject is also given a base. Here, this beautiful pillar coral has no base. The image is slightly disjointed, whereas here now the coral has a base, although I have to admit not much of a base. Here, this beautiful peacock shrimp, I amputated a portion of it in a not too desirable way, whereas this picture I include the entire shrimp. It's much more pleasing. Similarly, this image of my dive buddy photographing some spadefish doesn't quite work. Unfortunately, I've amputated my dive buddy's fin and the back fins of the spadefish. Too bad. Unsightly amputations. Whereas this picture is a little better. Two of my dive buddies and a lionfish, and I haven't amputated any key aspects of any of them. Here's an eel. I've amputated the nose of the eel. Not too good. Now here I show the eye and the nose of the eel, but you don't see the base where it's coming from. Something doesn't seem quite right. But this image is much better because now you can see the base that the eel emanates out of. And it's a better image in my opinion. So I hope this composition video was helpful to you by showing some examples of how we can frame our images to use negative space to provide context and scale, to provide our subjects with room to breathe and room to swim into, and to attempt to avoid unsightly amputations of portions of our subject. So thank you so much for your attention.